this, I want to tell you guys a little story about something that happened to me not too long ago when I decided to grab a drink with a friend on a popular street here in Tel Aviv, Dizengoff, maybe you guys know. Now, I'm really bad with directions. I'm like so bad with directions, it's embarrassing. Like, I get lost in my childhood neighborhood. That's how bad I am with directions. But for this particular time, I decided to go to this location and not use my GPS because I felt that a 10-minute walk, I could make it. And I got there, had a drink with a friend, it was really nice, got home, and about 2 minutes after I entered my apartment, I received this. A notification from Google Maps asking me to rate Spice House, the bar that I had just been in. Now, wait a minute, I thought to myself, did I tell Google Maps I went to Spice House? I mean, I know I had a drink, but I definitely did not give them this information. And so, although this was a really accurate prediction, this actually felt kind of creepy and intrusive. So just to introduce myself and give you guys a little bit of context, my name is Ali Vogel, and I'm currently a UX designer at Booking.com. And what I focus on is our machine learning products, because in our office in Tel Aviv, every feature that we build is actually based on machine learning. And although we are 17,000 employees at Booking, I know it's pretty hard to imagine, in Tel Aviv we're only 40 people. And we're a mix of product managers, designers, data scientists, and developers, all working for you, our user, in order to give you the most personalized travel experience. Now, just so we're all on the same page here and we understand what it is we're talking about when we say machine learning, essentially what machine learning is doing is using assumptive and predictive data in order to give you some sort of recommendation, all with minimal human intervention. But wait a minute. If there's minimal human intervention in this process, then what does this have to do with us as designers and UXers? And why does it actually matter? So from the talks that we've heard tonight and from the work that we've done, we understand that when we're building products, it all starts from our user. But the more data that we actually have, the more we can start to understand about our users and create these personalized experiences. I hope that coffee is really good. So the more data that we have about our users, the more we can start to build models in order to best understand them. And if we have these models and really understand things about our users, then in turn we can create the best user experiences, right? But this isn't always the case. So traditionally as designers, we would design for most cases and use user personas when we would actually start to build out our products. But now we've entered an age of hyper-personalization where we can actually start designing to the users on a one-to-one level. So we've all seen machine learning at play, whether we know it or not. So if anyone here uses Google Photos like I do, yeah, I know, it's awesome. And we get those recommendations for that weekend in Rome, or our cat that we love so much, or even start seeing pictures of our friends on our phones. Yeah, that's machine learning at play. And how about Facebook? All the content that we see on our feed is actually personalized to us as an individual user. And there's even entire companies that have created business models based on machine learning-centric products. So take Spotify, for example, where it revolutionized the music industry, which was once just a collection of music libraries such as iTunes, and actually started creating curated playlists in order to help you, depending on your mood or what you actually wanted to jam to that day. And Netflix, which again, before they started producing their own content, essentially what they were doing was creating recommendations for you to stream content that you would otherwise just watch on your television or online. Now, this is a snapshot from my personal Netflix account, and I want to take a poll here and ask you, the audience, to try to guess from this page what I was going through in my life when I took this snapshot. Yeah. So at the time, I was going through a pretty tough breakup, and probably from all of the chick flicks that I was watching, Netflix started recommending these types of shows to me. Now, this was the last thing that I should have been watching at the time, but of course, because Netflix knows me so well, I started to binge. And the more I binged, the more recommendations like this I started to get. But now the question begs, how far should personalization go? And just because we can hyper-personalize, should we? So we have actually been able to quantify this in a very, very scientific way, as you can see, which we call the cool to creepy scale. And when we're designing products at Booking.com, we actually start to categorize the things that we're building in the scale, and we ask ourselves, are users going to think this is cool? Or are users going to think this is very, very creepy, as we might have seen with the Google Maps example? And this is a really good way for us to think about the user and to test and to understand if the types of things that we can recommend to users, because we actually oftentimes can recommend a lot more things than we probably should. We ask ourselves these questions, whether users would actually want to see this type of content or not. And so as we were starting to go through this process of actually starting our office and building machine learning features, which actually wasn't that long ago, we've only been around for less than 2 years, we started to understand that we were missing something. So when we first opened up the office, the HR and the people that were based in Amsterdam were fully intent on hiring the best and most talented data scientists possible in order for us to implement all of this machine learning technology. But what we actually missed was trying to understand what users wanted to see when it came to personalization, especially in the context of travel. So what we ended up doing is creating a research project for personalization specifically, and we traveled to the US, to New York. It was a product manager, a user researcher, and a UX designer that actually went into people's homes, all with their consent, of course, I hope. And they did some ethnographic research, some diary studies, some one-to-one interviews, and some forum discussions to understand what people wanted to see when it came to user research. And these insights that were pulled from this trip, along with some follow-up studies that we've done, have actually shaped the way that we've started to think about personalization when it comes to travel. Because travel is very unique. And unlike streaming a mediocre episode on Netflix or listening to a bad song, the type of trip that you take and the recommendations that we can give you can completely transform the way you think about our brand. Imagine spending 5,000 euros on a terrible hotel. You'll never book with us again. So this is why when it comes to personalization and the types of recommendations that we give you, we have to be hypersensitive and understand a lot more about our users. And as I mentioned, this is because the stakes are very, very high. And when we give recommendations and we think about the type of recommendations that we give, we really have to put ourselves at the foot of where the user is and try to understand the full intent of their trip. And travel is very emotional. And what we found is that users actually wanted to be part of the search. So unlike certain tools where you would want to automate everything yourself, and we essentially could give you a full travel itinerary with the perfect hotel, or what we perceive to be the perfect hotel, and the perfect flight, and all the activities you want to do, we know from this research that people actually want to be part of the process. And so this is something that we had to think about as we're building out these tools, in terms of giving users just enough relevant content that they can make decisions on their own. Because again, users want to be part of the process. And another thing that we learned is that travel habits are very different depending on the context of the user. So the same person would maybe want to stay in a hostel if they're going on a stag party with their buddies, but then 3 weeks later want to stay in a 5-star resort on their honeymoon. So it's not enough just to understand the users that we're designing for, but it's vitally important to understand the context of the trip, and that actually changes from trip to trip within the same user. So as we're building these machine learning models and we're personalizing content to users, these are all different things we have to take into consideration, which, as if any of you guys have worked in any sort of recommendation system, the more features you add, the more difficult it can actually be to give these accurate predictions. So these are the types of things we have to think about when we're actually giving recommendations to our users. And the level of sensitivity that we need to have is very important, and it's unlike any other sort of recommendation system that I've ever worked on before. And so I want to share with you actually something that might be perceived as a failure to me as a designer, because this is just to demonstrate how important it actually is to take all these things into consideration that when I first started at Booking, I didn't necessarily know. And this was an experiment that we launched, because at Booking we work in an A/B testing environment called Trending Destination. Now, admittedly, I was the one who came up with this idea, so I thought it was amazing. And I thought users are going to love trending destinations. Trending topics are so hot on Facebook, on Google, there's lists. People want to understand what's trending. But what I actually failed to understand is that when it comes to travel, if you can't tell users the why behind the recommendation, then it's not necessarily relevant for them, even if our models tell us that it is. And in addition to that, the communication between myself and the data scientist was broken, because I didn't actually understand what the models were outputting. So in this particular case, we had a model that outputted destinations with certain parameters. But what the copy said was destinations people love from this season. But this actually wasn't aligned. And in addition to that, what we found is that even though we could give reasons for users to visit a certain location, we couldn't actually tell them why there was an uptick in Fira, Greece, or Vancouver, Canada this year over last. We could see it on our site, but we couldn't explain it, and that wasn't enough for users. And lastly, the reason this experiment failed is because what we found, and it was only through user research after we launched the experiment, is that travelers want to go to new and unique destinations. They don't necessarily want to go to tourist traps that everyone else is going to. And even though that's not what this machine learning model was outputting, I didn't communicate that right through the UI and copy. And so ultimately, this experiment was not successful. And so this is exactly why we need to get feedback from users. And what we found is that users actually want to be part of this feedback process. And they want to do so in two different ways. There's the functional feedback, which is users essentially telling us, let me be part of the process and let me make this recommendation better. And then there's the emotional part of the process, which is users saying, I want to play a role in shaping this trip. And this can actually manifest itself in several different forms. It could be a survey that you put on your site. It could be something as simple as a thumbs up or a thumbs down when you give a user a recommendation. And it could even be something as trivial as an X on a recommendation to indicate to users that they're actually not interested in what you're showing to them. And so we learned from this. And we launched another experiment called Not Relevant for Me. And so it's funny, if you look at my portfolio and I tell you, yeah, I put an X button on a picture, I'm such a good designer, you might laugh. But in essence, there was an entire experience around why we decided to do this. And this is actually something that you can see live on our site right now. Because what we found is that users wanted to be part of the process in this functional way. And because travel is such an emotional experience, this actually resonated really well with them. So what are some key takeaways that we can actually take when it comes to designing with machine learning, especially for personalization? So the first one is that we need to create trust with our users. We need to communicate with them constantly. We need to let our users be in control. We have to deliver the right message at the right time, as we know from the Google Maps example. And we need to understand how to manage mispredictions. Now I'll give you some examples from each one of these principles. Creating trust with our users. So one of the interesting things that I've seen, and you can see this is in particular from Android, but many other applications are starting to do this, is it's actually asking users what types of content they want to see and whether they should continue using them. So this actually lets the user emotionally be part of the process and to make sure that the recommendations that they're getting are things that are actually of interest to them. Now, communicating with our users. What does this actually mean? So we want to tell our users why we're delivering content to them. Have you guys ever seen some sort of product recommendation on a site that seems completely arbitrary? Yeah, I mean, I do all the time. But actually, there's normally a reason why you're seeing this. And if the vendor can't actually tell you the why behind it, then it might not make sense. Now, I got this on Pinterest, these pictures of puppies, and it was interesting to see why exactly I was getting this content. And if I can understand why I'm getting the content, it actually allows me to trust the recommendation a bit more. Now, we want to let our users be in control. And this is really important, especially when it comes to such a sensitive topic such as travel. So something interesting that LinkedIn does is they actually let you improve your feed. And this is really great because if you're seeing things on your feed that aren't relevant to you, then you're likely not going to stick to that product. But if you can see things that aren't relevant to you and actually control it, then you feel that you have a stake in the types of content that you're being delivered. And next, and this is something that I think can be said for any sort of product development, is that we want to deliver the right message at the right time. So Hopper is actually a prime example of this. Has anyone used this app, by the way? It's really popular in the US. Yeah. So Hopper is a really cool product because it actually uses machine learning to help you understand when prices fluctuate. And the interesting thing about them is anytime you follow a certain flight, you get a notification telling you if the prices will likely go up or go down and when you should book. And we actually found in our user research, this was one of the examples that users gave to us, is that they trusted Hopper's recommendations so much. One woman in particular said that she would jump off of her treadmill anytime she would get a recommendation from Hopper, and she would go ahead and book right then and there. That's really powerful. And so lastly, when designing with machine learning, and this, if anything, is probably the most important point, is we have to learn what to do when our predictions inevitably go wrong. And no matter how good our machine models are, they will go wrong. No model has 100% accuracy. So this is something interesting that I found on Reddit, where a user goes into PayPal and tells the PayPal agent, I've been scammed. And